Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of haunted house scary stories for you to listen to. Don't forget to check out our app, if you haven't already, for lots of extra scary stories and no ads. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was a kid, I lived in a haunted house. I'll preface this by saying I'm generally a very rational person and am skeptic by nature. I didn't grow up in a family that was religious or into the supernatural, and if I hadn't experienced these things myself, there's no doubt in my mind that I wouldn't believe in it today. Our house was built in 1912. On the outside, it seemed like a totally normal house. The moment I stepped inside the house, I felt uneasy and couldn't explain why. My sister and I shared a room upstairs. I was sitting on my bed in my room one day facing the doorway, and it was one of those accordion doors that would click closed, and there was a space of about 2 feet at the bottom where it didn't reach the floor. It was only my mum and I at home at the time, and she was downstairs. I heard the floor creak outside my door in the hallways as though someone was walking into my room. Then I saw a white mist-type figure pass by my door. At first, I thought it was my mum bringing laundry upstairs, and I waited for her feet to appear under the door, but they didn't. I went and peeked under my door to see who it was in the hallway, and there was no one there. There was no wind and no way it could have been a curtain blowing. I definitely saw something pass by my door. Another day, I was in my room alone. My family was downstairs in the kitchen at the time, and there was a wardrobe by the door that had a lamp on top of it. I was just sitting on my bed again when all of a sudden the lamp started to violently rock back and forth. It scared the crap out of me, so I immediately ran downstairs and my family could see I was scared and asked me what was wrong. I told them what happened and they all looked at each other. I discovered later they tried to protect me from knowing any of the paranormal experiences that happened there. Another day, my sister and I were in the living room. It was summer, and we had one of those window air conditioners in the kitchen window. My dad was just finishing building a detached garage outside and had turned the breaker off so that he could finish wiring the electrical to the garage. There was no electricity at all in the house. We were just sitting there all of a sudden when we hear the air conditioner turn on. My sister and I looked at each other and ran outside. My parents asked us what was wrong, and we told them how the air conditioner turned on by itself. My dad said that was impossible. There was no electricity going to the house. We had no explanation for how it turned on. On another day, I was in my room, and we had one of those big fans that sat on the floor. My sister would always yell at me for leaving it on when I wasn't in the room. On this day, it wasn't really hot, so I purposefully left the fan on. I went downstairs to have a shower, only my mum and sister were home at the time, and I came back to my room and the fan was switched off. I immediately felt uneasy because I knew I had left it on. I asked my mum and sister if they had gone upstairs while I was in the shower, but they hadn't. No explanation for how it turned off. This was back in the days where we would go record songs on the radio on cassette tapes, and one day I guess I forgot to press stop while recording and left the room. When I listened back, it sounded like a man and a woman arguing on the tape, but I couldn't quite make out what they were saying, as there was no one else in the room at the time. When I would go to sleep at night and the lights were out, I would see what I know were probably orbs, but at the time I had no idea what they were. It was like static electricity in the air. I don't know how to explain it. The closest thing I've ever seen to it is sparklers. It used to scare the crap out of me, and I would run to my mum's room to tell her, and she would say, "Oh, it's just your eyes playing tricks on you, don't you pay attention to it." I would go back to bed and hide my head under the covers. There was always a spirit that would stand in the corner of my room and watch us constantly. After we moved out, I told my mum one day that our new house felt so much happier than our old one. She asked me what I meant, and I told her how our old house had such a heavy atmosphere and felt totally different, and I always felt like I was being watched. I asked her if it was haunted, and she finally admitted to me that it had been, and they had tried to protect me from it because I was the youngest. I described two of the ghosts to her, the female that was always in the corner of my room, and the male spirit that stayed in my brother's. I described the time period they were from and how they dressed, that the woman was in a long dark dress, and the man sat on the floor in my brother's room and looked out the window. No idea how I knew these things, and it turned out I was pretty close, except the woman wore a dark veil that hid her head, and the man had no legs, which is why I thought he was always sitting. While we lived there, I had a reoccurring dream where I saw a little girl in a white nightgown, cowering in the hallway outside my bedroom and crying because the house was on fire. I was constantly paranoid about fires while living in that house, and would continually check the electrical outlets throughout the house to be sure everything was okay. After we moved, I worked at our local library, and there were tons of resources about the history of the town. Turns out before our old house was built at that location, there was a hotel. In the late 1800s, it was burnt to the ground, and many people died. My dad was the only one who didn't have experiences while we lived there. My mum had the most, and I think he started to think she was losing her mind. It wasn't until my siblings and I started telling him about our experiences, and specifically me with the lamp incident in my room, that he started to think there was something wrong with the house. My brother worked late nights and would get home around midnight. He would walk through the dark house to get to his room and would often hear someone calling his name. He thought it was our mum and would go into her room to see what she wanted, only to find her asleep. Eventually, he would rarely sleep there. He would sleep at his friends' or girlfriends' houses instead. My sister and I shared a room. We had the female ghost dressed in a black veil who would stand and watch us in the corner of our room. One night, my sister woke up to find someone sitting beside her on her side of the bed holding her hand. She thought it was me and asked what I was doing. No answer. She looked over to my bed and I was there sound asleep. She looked back and the figure was gone. To this day, she sleeps with her head under the covers and her arms tucked under her. My mum has had multiple experiences. I know she said there were at least 5 spirits in the house, plus others that would pass through. In our basement we had an old cold room, and this apparently is where the spirit portal was located in our house. Not sure why or how it got there, but I think the previous residents had dabbled in something they shouldn't have. As I said, previously there was a hotel that had burnt down at that location, killing several people. I think previous residents could sense the presence of these spirits and dabbled with Ouija or seances to contact them, and ended up inviting dark entities. It's just a theory. My mum is very sensitive to spirits and had experiences with all of them, I think. The woman in black was a protective one who would communicate with my mum quite a bit, and I believe it protected me from the others. My mum was walking down the basement one day and she lost her footing and started to fall, when she suddenly felt a hand on her chest push her back to an upright position. She never saw anyone, she just felt them catch her as she fell. Another day when she was vacuuming my brother's room, when the phone rang, she ran downstairs to answer it, and while she was downstairs she heard the vacuum start up and being pushed across the floor. She ran back upstairs, but by the time she got there it had stopped, and she was the only one home at the time. We also had many issues with phantom phone calls. This was before cell phones and we only had a landline. The phone would ring constantly and no one would be on the line, or we would hear static as though there was a muffled voice on the line, but we couldn't make out what they were saying. I don't know how many times we had the phone company come to check it out, only to find nothing wrong. Then it escalated. My dad would get up and leave for work in the middle of the night, and just after he would leave, we would get a call where the person would say, "I saw Barnabas leave for work." This freaked my mum right out, so the police became involved and tried to trace the calls and where they were coming from. We had to keep track of the time the calls came in and what was said, if anything, but they were never able to trace them. We moved shortly after and had the same phone number, but the calls stopped as soon as we moved and we never had any issues again. Before we moved, my mum was really worried that they would follow us. The woman in black was very religious, and my mum had an old Bible beside her bed. One morning she woke up to find the Bible open outside her on the nightstand, and these words highlighted, "And this house will be my home forevermore." Thankfully, they didn't follow us. I'm very sensitive to spirits and have had other experiences throughout my life. I hated that house and was happy to move, and I'm grateful for the experience because I know our spirits do continue on after death in a different way. I grew up in a house I believed to be haunted, experiencing numerous eerie events, including seeing an apparition and frequently hearing strange noises. One particular incident stands out vividly in my memory. I was downstairs alone when a sudden, inexplicable fear gripped me. I bolted down the stairs, and as I ran, I heard footsteps behind me, like a full-grown adult was chasing me. Reaching the top landing, I spun around only to experience a bizarre sensation. It felt as if a gust of wind went straight through me, blurring my vision as if I had dipped my face into freezing water while keeping my eyes open. Despite the strangeness of the event, I didn't feel nauseous afterwards. While there are many natural explanations for what I experienced, I can't help but wonder if it was a ghostly encounter given the numerous unexplained events in the house. The house was old and peculiar, and my bedroom was in the basement, though I did have a window. My brothers Ethan and Liam and I often heard footsteps shuffling outside the doors at night and knocking on our doors and windows. I could always hear when everyone went to bed and shut their doors, so I knew no one was sleepwalking. After we got a billiard table, it wasn't unusual to hear the balls getting knocked around the table at night. I saw the apparition when I was about 11, trying to fall asleep while staring at my bedroom door. We kept a light on at the foot of the stairs, and I saw her just walk past my door. She was a young girl, all white, wearing a long nightgown that reached the floor. Strangely, she walked through the wall opposite my door. What's even crazier is that my brother Ethan, whose bedroom was also in the basement, saw the same girl walk past the stairs at the same time. The next morning while we were having breakfast, he asked me, "So, did you see the girl too?" We described the same girl to our younger brother Logan, which likely scared him also. After that, I started keeping my door shut, but the knocking persisted. Ethan had even weirder stories. He once saw the girl walk through his room, through the door and then through the wall. One night while going to the bathroom, Ethan heard quick footsteps shuffling away on the carpet each time he tried to open the door. He also heard scratching like nails dragging across the door. Once, after a friend stayed over, they awoke to a Nintendo controller smashing into the door, having yanked the entire game system out of a cabinet. Logan saw the girl standing in his doorway once too. While my dad, Tom, never saw her, he believed us. He even had a talk with the ghost about not scaring us, and things did calm down significantly. He also mentioned an experience while walking down to our barns talking out loud. When he went into his shop and closed the door, he heard a man say, "He shut the door on us." One incident that stands out for its oddity occurred when I was a teenager. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the basement TV blaring static at full volume. By then I was aware of all the strange happenings in the house, but I wasn't afraid, just annoyed I was being woken up. I chalk the memory up to creepy, but not necessarily supernatural, as tech can do weird stuff as well. What do you all think? I was around 12 to 13 years old and lived in what is known as a railroad apartment, where all the bedrooms are connected so you have to go through one to get to the next. It was in Queens, about a block away from a cemetery. It was a pretty old place. I say I don't believe in ghosts, but I don't know how to explain the following. From my bedroom door, I could see the front entrance and the bathroom door. They both had opaque glass. I went to the bathroom, which is about 3 feet away from my room, and put my hand on the knob, and it twisted back and forth quickly multiple times before I freaked out and jumped back into my room. From my bed, I waited for my family to come back home. I watched the bathroom door and front door the whole time. It wasn't a prank. It wasn't just an old door. Something moved that. My parents later told me they had seen kids that ran through the apartment and heard people speaking at times. I don't know if I could believe them, but to this day I don't know what else it could be. My parents' last house was very haunted, and no one believed me until I moved out. My mum kind of thought something was fishy, but never fully accepted that it was haunted until later. I would mostly hear bumps and thumps in the night, but the first incident I remember really messed with me was when I was with my mum. I was sitting on the couch, and we heard silverware falling in the kitchen. When I got up to investigate, I found that the brownie knife that was placed in the bottom of the brownie pan was not only on the floor, but halfway down the hall, a good 7 to 8 feet from the kitchen. After that, and a few other things falling/moving unexpectedly, I was convinced, but my parents not so much. Until my stepdad would sleep in my room on occasion after I left, is where I experienced most of the hauntings, which were just thumps and bumps in the night, but they sounded like someone slamming a closed fist on the wall or ceiling. One night he moved to my room as he snores very loudly, and he said he heard the knocks and bumps. After he jokingly asked it, "What do you want?" the room got super cold to the point where he could see his breath, and the guy just goes to sleep after. Then a few weeks later, my mum told me she rolled over in the middle of the night because she kept hearing someone whisper her name, to see a tiny Asian woman kneeling at the side of her bed, to which she responded by rolling back around and going back to sleep. I don't know how they stayed there and just ignored that, but I was glad I moved out when I did. My mum cleans a lot, and sometimes cleaned into the night. One night she was vacuuming the basement at around 2 to 3 a.m. As she was vacuuming, she heard a loud shh right by her ear. She turned around to see who was there, but there was no one. Needless to say, she stopped cleaning for the night and went to bed. I'd also like to add that there's a laundry chute in the upstairs hallway. Once my dad bent down to open it and then quickly pulled his hand away and stood up fast. He came to the kitchen where I was with my mum and said he saw a translucent hand reaching at the handle at the same time he was. It freaked him the hell out. There was another occasion when my younger brother was asleep in his room when he woke up and saw a brightly lit translucent lady kneeling by the foot of his bed as if she were praying. He got really scared and turned away and tried to fall asleep as fast as he could. On another occasion, my sister woke up in the morning and saw a shadowy figure of a man standing at her bedroom doorway. She rubbed her eyes and put on her glasses and looked again, but the figure was now gone. My final story is from when I was downstairs watching the Thor movie with my wife and kids and some nephews of ours. As we were watching, one of the kids' electronic toys started making noise. I went over and there was a toy there, but it was in the off position. That really frightened one of my nephews, understandably. In the house I lived in when I was 3, things would come flying off the walls, and you'd hear someone trying to jiggle the door open, but when you'd open the door, no one was there. In this very same house, when I was 4 years old, I went up to my mum and told her the angels were coming to take me away. She freaked out and asked me to tell them I couldn't go with them yet. In the same house, my mum asked a priest to come bless it and see if it would calm things down. The guy wouldn't even set foot through the threshold. The priest didn't even say anything. My mum just opened the door and the priest looked at her and the house and then her again. Then he just turned and walked away. And when my mum asked if he was going to bless the house, he shook his head and wished her luck. We moved a bunch of times since then, but it seems like these things have followed us. I lived in a house near several cemeteries and some railroad tracks. I would sometimes wake up and see shadow-like people standing in my bedroom doorway. I dismissed it as my not-quite-awake brain manifesting things. I told my husband about seeing them and how I never felt unsafe, and after the first couple of times would just go back to sleep. But one day he came home from work and told me my ghost hitched a ride with him. I had this doily angel hanging on a doorknob that somehow ended up in the back seat of his car. It wasn't something that could have just accidentally got scooped up. I didn't see shadow people after that, so I guess something hitched a ride out of there. For context, I do not believe in ghosts, but the first house my wife and I bought was an old 2-story home from 1910. We couldn't find the realtor key to get inside, so we were looking around on the porch and I glanced upstairs to see a hand pull away from the curtain, as if someone had looked down to see what the commotion was. "Oh, there's someone inside," I exclaim. We're all calling out to let us in, but there's no answer. A few minutes later, we find the key and let ourselves in. Of course, there's no one inside. The place was beautiful and old, with a grand library room out front, partitioned by these 2 pillars, so we buy it. After we move in, the neighbor comes by. "Oh, what a lovely house. So sad about the previous owners." Turns out the couple who had owned it both met an untimely end in a car wreck the day they signed the papers to sell it. Afterwards, we discovered the continual leaks, creaks, and thumps of the house. If you were sitting downstairs, it would sound like the furniture was being moved around upstairs. More than once, my wife would come up and ask what the hell I was doing thumping around, when I'd been sitting in my chair reading the whole time. Just countless things like this. Taps on the walls when you're laying in bed, thock 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 on the wooden steps leading up to the second floor, all the time. Old houses make noise. They stretch and shrink as the temperatures change, but I never told anyone else that. Guests would hear the thumping in the hallway and be all confused, and I'd arch an eyebrow and put my finger to my lips and just go, "Shh." The place had an interesting history. It had been the local Catholic church rectory until there was some sort of scandal about its construction by the local timber company owner that got the resident priest literally sent to Mozambique. It was sad to leave it. Sometimes I still drive by and stop and look at it when I'm in the neighborhood. The childhood detached home I grew up in was definitely haunted and still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Our whole family would be downstairs watching TV and eating dinner, and everyone would hear very clear footsteps on the second floor pacing back and forth. My parents used to tell my sister and I that because the pipes were connected between homes, we could hear the footsteps of neighbors. It didn't really make sense, but sure. When I was buying my first house, I casually mentioned to my mum that I hope I wouldn't be able to hear the neighbors walking in their home. That's when she remembered that it was a lie they'd tell my sister and I so that we wouldn't be afraid. My sister and I had lots of nightmares growing up, and my mum didn't think it would be a good idea to tell us that she was also scared of the ghosts and that they were very real. My mum said that from the way the footsteps sounded, it sounded as if when my grandma, my father's mum, was alive and would pace upstairs to get me to go to sleep. My dad always found comfort in hearing those footsteps pacing back and forth after his mum passed, so I guess that's why no one made a big deal out of it. I would like to start off by saying that I was always skeptical of ghosts until our family moved into the house in January of 2001. 7 months before we moved in, around the 4th of July 2000, the previous owner ended their life in my parents' bedroom. Every single one of my family members had experienced odd things happening that we all attributed to a ghost. For instance, multiple times a day, it sounded like the garage door was opening and closing without anyone being near it. Once when I was little, my mum and I were home by ourselves and we heard someone pacing on the second floor. It unnerved us so much we left until my dad arrived, as we thought someone else might actually be in the house. But the craziest thing above all is one summer I was having a fire with some friends in the backyard, and from the ashes I see numbers start appearing in sequence, repeatedly. 9, 3, 20, 36, over and over. It was one of the oddest things I've ever seen. It being early July, I immediately remembered if it had anything to do with our ghost. So the next morning I looked through the local obituaries from 2000, and lo and behold, the previous night was the 15th anniversary of the previous owner's suicide. I'm not sure what the numbers mean, but my guess is that it was a date, September 3rd, 2036. When I was a kid, we lived in a house out in the country. And before I started kindergarten, my mum decided she wanted us to live in town, so we bought a house in town but kept our old house to rent out. I don't remember a lot about this house. A few creepy things happened to me, but my mum, on the other hand, had a lot of very unnerving things happen to her in the house, and she won't really talk about them. We moved back to our old house after less than a year. I remember one night I was laying in bed half asleep, facing the wall, and it felt like someone crawled into bed with me. I felt the blankets move and the pressure on the bed, but no one touched me. I just assumed it was my mum and fell back asleep. The next morning I asked her why she came to sleep with me, and she said that she hadn't. Another time I was taking a bath, and I always liked the shower curtain closed when I was in the bath, and I heard someone humming in the bathroom and thought it was my mum. I'd said something to her but got no response. A few minutes later, my mum did come into the bathroom, pulled the curtain back to check on me. I asked why she didn't reply to me before, and she said she had been outside hanging clothes on the line and hadn't been in there. Those are the only things that happened to me that I can't really rationalize. My mum didn't work, so she was home a lot by herself while I was at school and while my dad was at work, and the bulk of what happened to her while she was home alone. She never talks about it, as it all really traumatized her, but I did get her to share one story with me one night after a few glasses of wine. She said the incident that made her decide we had to leave was when she was in the bathroom and she was trying to get out, but the door wouldn't open and the lights turned off, and she could hear breathing behind her getting closer and closer. She said she closed her eyes, recited Psalm 23 out loud, and the door opened. We moved out and back to our old house as soon as school let out for the summer. My mum said an older couple bought the house. I'm not sure if they still live there or not, or if they even experienced anything. In the townhouse my mum and I used to live in, we had a spectre who we affectionately called Mr. Ghost. One night I was sitting up on my bed on the computer and had this random coughing fit. So I went to the hallway where he had some cough medicine on the bookcase, but it didn't have one of those little measuring cups, but I knew there was one in the medicine cabinet downstairs. I dropped the bottle in the hallway, set it back on the bookcase and went to get the little cup. When I came back, there's a cup on the bottle. Now I know there wasn't one before, because when I dropped the bottle and picked it up, I would have had to have picked up the cup too, as it's not a very snug fit and would have come off straight away, and I know I didn't see one. My mum was asleep and didn't know any of this until the next day, and no one else was in the house. I figured Mr. Ghost was just trying to help me out, so I said, "Thanks, Mr. Ghost," took my cough medicine, and went to bed. Another time, my sister and her boyfriend were staying with us for a few weeks, so they slept in my room and I slept on the couch. One night, the light fixture on the ceiling fan above the bed broke. The round part covering the bulb fell off and landed on her boyfriend. The way they were sleeping, it fell straight down, and it would have landed on my sister, but it went sideways and landed on him instead. Another time, my sister was home alone and taking a shower. She heard someone with boots on walk through my room on the other side of the bathroom wall, and it sounded like they walked through my bedroom and went into the apartment next door. She heard something next door break, and our neighbor yell, "What the hell?" And finally, Mother's Day of 2013, my mum passed away a week before, and I was sitting on my bed getting ready for work, thinking how the hell I was supposed to get through that day. and I heard breathing, like someone was standing in front of me breathing. But there was no one else in the house. I even checked under the bed and in the closet for the cat. No one was there. I know it wasn't my breathing because I heard my own breathing and then felt this other breathing on top of it. I don't know whether it was Mr. Ghost or my mum's spirit, maybe both, but it felt like one of them was trying to comfort me. It freaked me out enough to distract me from the emotional pain, so that was good, I guess. When I slept in the basement, one night I woke up at 3 a.m. with my cell phone light on and unlocked. It was a 2008 BlackBerry. I looked up at the door entrance and saw a shadow figure look at me with the bathroom light behind it. I thought it was my cousin, but he later told me he wasn't home that night. I look at my phone and it was a video with negative effect of what looked like sit-ups. I deleted the video and went to sleep. The worst was about 6 months later, when I finally slept next to my parents' room because of the many ghostly encounters. I was laying in bed unable to sleep, so I look out the window and a shadow from behind my dresser runs out my room. Annoyed, I turn to face the wall. Then I see this Medusa-type hair creeping up from my bedroom wall. Once I got to the top of the thing's forehead, I turned back around and tried to go back to sleep. My older brother and his friends saw the worst. They would mention years later about the cute little cow statues that we had in our room that would move around at night. When I was a small kid, I used to live at my grandma's. The house was tiny, but she wasn't living there then, and my parents were quite broke. My dad always complained that he had some bad feeling about the house. He felt like something was wrong. One night I was sleeping and suddenly got awake. Nothing and nobody there. But there was something going on. My lamp was shaking literally from side to side of the roof. I got pretty scared, so I called my mum. She came in and turned the light on. The lamp stopped static in its place. When I told her what happened, she didn't believe me. Some years later, my mum was preparing some meal while my dad and I were watching TV. There was a sudden big noise coming from the bathroom. Now, what was that? My dad went to the bathroom and found out that the big mirror we had was on the floor. It fell but didn't break. He thought that maybe somehow the hook got bent, and that's why it fell. He tried to move them one by one, but found no fault. All were perfectly tight in their place. Shortly after, Mum and Dad were watching TV, and I was sitting on the floor playing with some toys. One of our decorations over the TV was a desert rose, a stone. For no reason, it suddenly jumped out of the TV. It didn't fall, it almost jumped 2 meters from it, as if someone took it and threw it. It fell quite close to me, and my mother was shocked. No doubt why my dad thought the house was haunted. Luckily, soon after that, we moved to our own house, and the weird stuff stopped going on. Ever since I was a kid, my sister joked about a little boy's ghost watching her change when she was like 16. My house is in a 4-house module, or complex, 2 houses on top and 2 houses on the ground floor, connected via an outdoor staircase. It's a bit weird. Anyway, we always joked around. Then my dad bought the house next door. We tore down the walls and we suddenly had a really big house. I got the first room out of the 3. My aunt got the one in the middle of mine and my brother's, and I remember the first of many times that my brother couldn't sleep, and he stayed up for days and days, fighting back his sleepiness until he just dropped on someone else's bed. When my mum asked him about it, he said he felt something in his room like a huge pressure on his body, and that he wasn't comfortable sleeping in there sometimes. When his friends stayed over, they were drinking quietly, only leaving his room to get another can or bottle of beer from the kitchen. But they told us they saw someone sitting on the living room couch. Someone human-shaped, almost like a shadow. And then it was gone. Stuff falls down from the shelves, and sometimes fruit goes bad really quick, like in the movies. We don't know what's happening, but my mum lights up holy candles once a month and has a gallon of holy water just in case. I'd like to start by saying I had a paranormal investigation team come to my apartment. They cleansed it, and it's all seemed to calm down for the most part after their third visit. But just before Christmas, activity exploded. Doors slamming open in my apartment, voices, running footsteps, the faucets turning on and off by themselves, even my dog getting pets sometimes, and it looks like slapped others. One Saturday while I was using the bathroom, it sounded like someone broke into my apartment. I still have Christmas decorations up and jingle bells on my front door, and they went ballistic, like someone slung the door open and shut. Granted, I never heard the door shut, and it was locked. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I live alone. My dog and kitten were hissing and snarling, like someone they hate had just walked in. I must stress that my pets are very loving towards each other and don't fight, ever. I'm 5'1" and about 110 pounds. I'm not big, but I tried to make myself as mean-seeming as possible, and I ran out of the bathroom with one of my little pocket tasers out. What I saw when I exited the bathroom was shocking to say the least. The heavy tray full of random things on my coffee table was now on the floor. Mind you, the only sound I had heard before this were the booming footsteps. All of the cabinets and my side table and coffee table were open, and I think the scariest part was my bar stools were still when I passed them, but when I checked the locked doors I heard a cat hissing from behind me, and both of my bar stools were suddenly spinning, one clockwise, the other counterclockwise. Then it was like someone had grunted in my ear. Mentally, I tried to reason that my boyfriend had come over and was messing with me, until I realized he was at his place, more than likely asleep, and doesn't have a key. I was still holding my little taser, and I hit the trigger and jammed it backwards, hoping to hit whatever was behind me, but there was no sound. Nothing. No one was there. I then called my boyfriend, obviously shaken up, and not really wanting to talk when he asked about it. Today, things picked up a lot more. See, I work night shift, therefore I sleep during the day. I was showering this morning, as I live alone, like I said. The kitten was in the shower with me because he is weird, and my dog was curled up on the mat next to the toilet. I turn around to reach for my soap, and it's like someone was standing in the bathroom, pushing their arm through the shower curtain to touch me. I slapped it, not really knowing what to do, and I think I made it mad. The curtain then flung open and all the hooks came off the shower rod and the whole thing hit the ground. My dog, who is normally tame and a big scaredy cat, started growling and ran out the room. I decided my hair didn't need to be washed, and I ran out the room, completely forgetting about my towel. At this point I was standing in the living room sopping wet, my dog crying in the kitchen on the couch while I slowly span around. It was like my apartment was alive. Everything seemed to be moving. The bar stools, the Polaroid camera on the coffee table, even the leashes hanging from the hooks by the door swayed. As fast as it happened, it all stopped. It was quiet for a moment, until my pet's food container flipped over in the kitchen and the water in the faucets and bathrooms and kitchen turned on full blast. I'd like to note that my kitten has learned how to turn them on so he can sit under the water, which I began to blame him on, until I felt him walk up and start licking the water from my legs. I felt like crying at this point, like this horrible gut-wrenching feeling filled me, like something that felt worse than anything I've ever felt before this, when I decided I had to go, starting pulling on random clothes that I left hanging over my bar stool, and as I was putting on my pants I noticed my extremely thick hair was hanging over my head, like it should, while I'm pulling my still wet body through leggings. A couple of strands were lifted like something was holding them away from my face. I screamed and ran outside, holding my kitten and my very large dog in my arms. I could hear what sounded like growling as I closed the door. I sat in my car for an hour and a half before I went back inside, put my dog in his kennel, which I shut with both latches, and this time I actually left. I was gone for about an hour due to an errand I had to run, and when I opened my front door, my dog jumped on me. Mind you, I locked his cage. His collar was off, and he seemed happy enough. The cat bed and blanket that stayed on top of it were also on the floor, and the kennel door was still locked. I was in shock, to say the least. My dog is a big boy, very muscular, and this escape trick has only happened twice before. Once when I first got him, and today being the second. The entire apartment was cold, and truthfully, I feel like I have tried everything to protect myself and my pets. I'm strong in my faith and pray every day. I've saged my apartment, as have the paranormal team that came 3 times, but nothing seems to work. But even with all of this, plus the previous stuff that I haven't yet shared, the absolute scariest place for me is the very small apartment I live in, and any help anyone can offer would be very appreciated. For context, the spirit in our home had proved to be very possessive of me and kept attempting to keep me from my boyfriend and win my attention. Every night when he would be working into the wee hours, I fell asleep in our room with the bedroom door unlocked to grant him easy access. Every night when he got home, it was firmly locked. I heard him calling for me in other rooms while showering and would emerge to find the house always empty and my boyfriend at the gas station in the backyard. It would sit next to me on the bed, appearing to me while bathing by rapping on the door when I was alone, always seeking my attention. My then boyfriend was deployed, and I was just starting on a glass of wine, settling onto the living room couch. We had decorated right before he left, but I was lonely and hadn't heard from him in 2 days. A tear slipped and I heard a sound. No branch had moved. There was no breeze or fan, but a glass ball had gently dropped from the tree onto the wood floor without shattering. I stared at it as it stayed in place for a second under the tree. Then it slowly rolled 4 feet in my direction, over the lip of the thick, heavy rug, which shouldn't have been possible, and stopped directly in front of my feet. The first of many gifts to cheer me up. I received a vintage children's card, a queen of spades with torn edges and yellow paper shortly after. I didn't know where it came from. It appeared one day, and I would throw it out, and it would appear elsewhere, the garage, the windowsill, under the bed. One time my boyfriend threw it out, as if in angry retaliation. When I was in the bath that evening, the spirit of a woman sat on my chest, pressing me into the water. I couldn't move. It was like a night terror. But with risk of drowning, she had a twisted, hateful face, and after that moment of clawing at my sides of the tub, I was released. We sold the house earlier this year and moved across the country. We found out that the previous owner had been a depressed, manic hoarder who kept animals that she seemingly abused within the home. I don't know what had happened to her, if it's guaranteed she died on the house or what, but the spirit that dwelled there was the unhappiest thing I'd ever encountered. This isn't my house's story, but my old friend's house. A lot happened there. When she was a child, she would hear footsteps when no one else was there, and the humming of small children. I didn't know about any of it until a sleepover when we were 12-ish. We were in the basement with other friends. She said that if we heard whispers in the night to not worry about it. There was an old man spirit in the guest room in the basement. She said he was cranky but not harmful. We were all like, huh, yeah, lol. In the middle of the night, around 1 a.m., we were all still up, and I looked over to my left where there was a table set with 4 chairs. Previously, all the chairs had been tucked into the table. Now one of them was pulled out about 2 feet and pointing at us, like someone was sitting there watching. I pointed it to my friends. The other 2 at the sleepover freak out. The friend whose house this was casually goes, "Yeah, I told you." 3 years go by. The only incident in those 3 years that I was around for was when I was over and used the guest bathroom, which was in the basement where we were hanging out. To go to the guest bathroom, you had to pass by the inlet/door to the guest bedroom that was in the basement. It was just a regular room, but dear God, no one wanted to stay in that room for long. It gives you this feeling that makes you feel like you have to get out of there now. Anyway, I had to pass by the door, and every time there would be a deep whispering coming from there, like 2 people talking back and forth in whispers. After the bathroom, I told my friend that I heard that, and she just says, "Oh no, that's probably just Cassandra. She takes her private phone calls in there sometimes. Ooh, it wasn't a ghost. I was so relieved. I go upstairs to ask her mum for some pampering, cramp medicine, and as I was doing that, her sister arrives home, meaning that she wasn't whispering in the basement at all. Oh. So the real spooky stuff starts happening when I was around 15. I had an interest in the paranormal at this point, and I thought I was hot stuff. I wasn't. I watched Ghost Adventures all the time, and loved to say that I could tell the BS episodes from the genuine ghosts they encountered on the show. So my friend knew this, and one day she calls me up and says, "Hey, can you get rid of the ghost in my house? They're really freaking me out." She says they're opening and closing the drawers in her room and moving stuff around. A glow stick bracelet her boyfriend gave her had taken itself out of her nightside table drawer and gone across the room to be sitting on her dresser in plain view when you enter the door. She could constantly feel the spirits just hanging around her. She could hear whispering coming from the walls where she slept. I think, oh hell yeah, I get to be the ghost hunter this time. So I go over to her house and put 2 quartz crystals from my collection near her front door to lure the spirits out. Warning, this didn't work. Then I sprayed her room with my mum's holy water that I borrowed. Right when I was done spraying the doorframe with holy water, she stops and turns to me and says, "Can you feel anything right now?" I reply, "I don't think so, why?" She's dead serious. I'd never seen her this scared before, but she was scared and goes, "He's right behind me. Right now." I couldn't feel or see anything, but just how scared, and she was freaking me out. We both darted out the room. We go outside, and she says she can't feel the spirits while we're outside. I call my mum and say, "Hey mum, aren't evil spirits not supposed to be able to go through doorways sprinkled with holy water?" My mum kinda goes, "What are you saying?" I explained the situation to her, and my mum goes, "Well, has it occurred to you that it didn't work because they're not evil?" Oh, I didn't think about that. My friend's older sister gives me a ride home since my mum's at work. It's only 4 p.m. and it's still quite sunny out and I'm home alone. I'm in my kitchen and for some reason my dog won't come into the kitchen with me. Whatever, I was just grabbing a snack. So my microwave starts to scream. It wasn't on. I wasn't near it. The screen didn't turn on. It just started screaming. At first it was the high pitch that beeps to let you know it's done, but it wasn't beeping, it was just this continuous screech. Then it gets higher pitch and higher. It definitely wasn't supposed to make that sound, so I run into the dining room to grab the phone to call my mother. Next to the phone on the dining room table, my school-issued iPad began screaming as well, at the same pitch. It was screeching while the home screen buttons were flickering on and off, like someone was repeatedly hitting the power button. The power button wasn't moving nor making any noise like they usually do, and 15-year-old me is freaking out, thinking I brought the spirits home. I grab the house phone, grab my dog, bolt out the front door and call my mum from the driveway crying, telling her everything that just happened. She says she'll be home in an hour after she finishes her reports, and I stay outside on the driveway for an hour, with my dog waiting. So that night she calls her college friend, who is a super duper psychic. And I sit down with my mum's psychic friend over the phone and tell her in detail everything what happens. She goes, house on the hill, used to be a barn. I've no idea what she's talking about. I asked my friend the next day, and she said her house was built on the foundation of a barn that used to be for the super rich people that owned all the land before it was developed into neighborhoods, and they had racehorses there. She goes, a couple of ghosts there, because the house is built on a spring, and natural springs are good energy gateways for spirits. But the two you're talking about, an 11-year-old girl and a 6-year-old brother, siblings, they died in the barn from some type of disease back in 1910. They don't mean any harm, just try and be nice to them, they're only just playing. I'm like, oh sweet, they're not evil. Thanks. But what about the ones in the basement? I don't see anything from their basement. She lives like a 6-hour drive away, and none of the information she told me is available online. There's no way she could have found the history of this house and known it was built on a horse farm foundation, especially since she told me right after I finished telling her the ghostly experience. That would have given her what? about 7 minutes to find out all this info while listening? I reiterated again that there was definitely something in the basement, but by the tone of her voice I could tell that she thought I was making up those parts. What else happened there? A ton of weird stuff. Beside the basics like the footsteps in the empty hallways when you're home alone, and whispers coming from the walls. At one point they had people over to search their entire house up and down to make sure there weren't squatters living in the attic or basement, or there being any secret passages, but they found nothing. At a party she was having, there was a glowing white-shaped orb that kept appearing and flashing over the couch. Over 10 people saw it and confirmed that they could see it. For some reason, no one was freaked out by this glowing orb. We all saw it, but just carried on our conversation. Finally, someone asked if there was strobe lighting in the ceiling. We took down the ceiling panels just to be sure, but there wasn't. We all agreed it was probably a good spirit since none of us were freaking out. There was also the Shadow Man, which I believed was the thing in the basement that the psychic's friend couldn't sense. Since shadow people aren't human spirits, we could always see him walking around and sitting on the corner chair of the basement. The lights would always flicker and sometimes shut off, but we just got up and turned off the light switch and turned it back on again, and they would stop flickering. That didn't really scare us, and we thought it was just faulty wiring, until my friend's dad had a professional electrician down there to try and fix it, and he found nothing wrong, and they replaced all the light bulbs and it kept happening. Sometimes my friend wouldn't come out of the shower to see figures standing in the bathroom just staring at her. That scared her a lot, and it scared me to hear about. She one time came out of the shower with a hand-shaped bruise on her wrists, ankle and neck. That's definitely the brunt of it. Safe to say, I was definitely scared by my experiences. We bought a house from an estate sale, had a garage that led into a laundry room, into a hallway and into the living room/bedrooms depending on which way you went. I was out of work and spent parts of my day watching TV in the living room. One day I heard the main door from the garage to laundry room open and close and footsteps over the tile. I yell out, "You feeling okay?" as my wife would come home with bad headaches from time to time, and I got no answer. I got up and went to the laundry room and there was no one there. Opened the main door to the garage and my wife's car wasn't there either. Several times I would be in the living room and would hear the door open and footsteps in the hallway, and I was always home alone. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's Haunted House Scary Stories. If of course you did, you can let me know down below. Huge thanks as always to my members and my patrons whose names you can see on screen. If you would like to join their ranks, have your name in the credits, and receive a bunch of cool perks every week, follow the links in the description to find out more. But if you want more stories, that's exactly what we have for you on screen now. So click more and hopefully see you on the next one. Good night.